This episode is brought to you by Namely. We've all heard the news. The Great Resignation is affecting so many businesses, and let's face it, keeping employees engaged and connected is crucial to avoid high turnover and its even higher cost. That's why I think you should check out Namely, the all-in-one HR solution that offers everything you need to hire, inspire, and retain your workforce, which, as you all know, is something that I am extremely passionate about. So you can say goodbye to the Great Resignation and hello to the Great Re-engagement. Whether you have 50 or 1,000 employees, Namely is going to help you maintain a great experience for the entire employee lifecycle, with onboarding, performance management, and intuitive benefits enrollment all on one connected platform. Plus, Namely can also streamline your payroll, time tracking, and vacation requests, and help make you everyone's favorite HR leader. Companies are built on people, so don't let either fall. Learn more about making the switch to Namely, and for a limited time, get your first month free when you make the switch. Go to namely.com today. Don't wait. That's Namely, Namely.com. You'll be glad you did.
We quickly had to figure out we were facing the same growing pains that any fast-growing company has, and we were trying to figure out how and when to layer in process, because we knew that doesn't scale. You know, there are only 168 hours in the week, and you can't work any more than that. You also have to sleep and eat and go home and spend time with your family. So we knew that this we'd have to change the way we operated in order to continue to grow as fast as we were.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Future of Work with Jacob Morgan. My guest today, Colin Breyer. He's the co-author of Working Backwards and co-founder of Working Backwards, LLC. Colin, thank you for joining me.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Jacob. Happy to be here.
So my wife and I have been quite obsessed with the company because we had the opportunity to tour the facilities a little while ago. And I know Amazon does all sorts of things in really cool ways, which we'll talk about today. But why don't we get started with a little bit of background information about you and how you got involved with Amazon?
Sure. I started working at Amazon in March of 1998, and the facilities at Amazon then were a little smaller. It was a small 4-story building, probably about a half mile from where the main campus is today. That building's no longer there, but there were 100 people in the corporate area at Amazon, and we were at that point in time just selling books, and we had two small fulfillment centers, one in Seattle and one out in Delaware. And I started working in the software development group, and then ended up managing Amazon's affiliate network, where we managed we worked with roughly 1 million other websites linking to Amazon. And then I got to spend 2 years working with Jeff Bezos as his technical advisor. Was very lucky and fortunate to be doing that, spending 10 hours a day with Jeff for a little over 2 years. And then after that, I spent 5 years at IMDb, the Internet Movie Database. Which
everyone knows IMDb.
So yeah, totally owned subsidiary of Amazon as its chief operating officer.
Wow, very cool. Okay, so when you started, there were around 100 people in corporate. How many are there now? Just so people can get a sense of how massive Amazon is.
Yeah, so there are about 500 people total in the company, so 100 people in the corporate area, and then we had 2 fulfillment centers and customer service, so that total was about 500. And right now, at last I saw, Amazon's a little over 1.3 million employees.
That is insane. That is just mind-boggling large. I think it's, from what I remember, I think Yum Brands back in the day was one of the world's largest employers. I think you guys have eclipsed them as being one of the world's largest employers now, which is amazing. What was it like, first of all, before we talk about Amazon, what was it like spending all of that time with Jeff? Because obviously you see things, you hear things in the news, on TV, on social media, but you worked with him firsthand. Can you talk a little bit about what that experience was like and what you learned from him, if anything?
Yeah, it was a fantastic experience. As I mentioned, I was very lucky to have been in that role for 2 years. But during that time, we were inventing and creating what are now household names: AWS, Amazon Prime, Kindle, and fulfillment by Amazon. But also, what doesn't really hasn't really didn't make the press or the papers is we Jeff and the Jeff's management team, spent a whole lot of time focusing inward on how do you instrument and build processes within Amazon so it can scale 10 and 100x. And we put just as much effort on that as we did in some of these other products. So I learned a ton about not only what it's like to take an idea on a whiteboard and turn it into a household name, but also how to create simple processes that work across a number of different types of organizations to build and your company and grow it fast while remaining nimble and true to your roots.
Before we talk about some of the things that Amazon does, I just want to give people a disclaimer. If people follow the same, I guess, processes or approaches, do you think that will automatically mean that they can achieve some greater level of success in their organizations as well? Or is there something more than just behind the processes?
So I think that what Amazon has really created, these processes are really advances in management science. And what we strove to do was talk about them and explain them in ways where people can study them and, should they choose to, implement them in their own organizations.
Okay.
I will say they've been proven to work across a number of different industries: B2B, B2C, digital streaming of bits, and everything in between, hardware devices, pure software. And then they work in small groups just as well as large multinational corporations. Okay. So we're not out to try to change the world to make it look more like Amazon, but I think Amazon has created some things that are worthy of study, and that can help organizations grow and be inventive, customer focused, long term thinking companies that really have a crisp operational excellence bent to them.
Okay. Makes sense. What was Amazon like when you first started working there? And can you talk about how, I suppose we should talk about the processes first, then we can talk about where they came from. But what was Amazon actually like when you first joined? And did you see an evolution in what it was like to work there during your tenure?
Yeah, so it was a very tense environment. We were growing fast. There was a mantra: get big fast. We were just in books, but in a relatively short period of time, we were turned from a single category retailer to multi-categories, and then also expanded into the UK, Germany, Japan, and France relatively quickly. So just that was a big ballooning of the company and the product and the portfolio. And I would say at that point in time, it relied on a lot of individual heroic efforts to save the day, to get all the orders out. What it was like, sometimes we'd be at our desks and we'd get an email would go out and say, hey, we got a lot of orders today. We could sure use your help when you're done to go down to the fulfillment center, which was just a giant warehouse with bookshelves. It wasn't automated or anything, and help us pick and pack books. So we'd take the bus or get a ride down there, and then work a couple hours to make sure that we fulfilled all the orders that came in during the day. And so it relied on a lot of individual heroic efforts, is the way I put it. And so we quickly had to figure out, we were facing the same growing pains that any fast growing company has. And we were trying to figure out how and when to layer in process, because we knew that doesn't scale. There are only 168 hours in the week, and you can't work any more than that. You also have to sleep and eat and go home and spend time with your family. So we knew that we'd have to change the way we operated in order to continue to grow as fast as we were.
Well, let's talk about some of the practices in Amazon. You talk about a couple in the book, and just so you can be prepared, I'm going to ask you about things that Amazon does that are not in the book. So if you think of anything, now's your chance to think of those before we get to them. But the first one that I want to talk about is the PRFAQs. I'm not actually sure the right way to call it. I call it PRFAQs. But I learned about this with my wife when we visited Amazon. And we were fascinated because we were told that Amazon never does PowerPoint, and instead what they do instead is everyone does like these 6-page reports, and you basically answer a bunch of questions, lay out kind of your idea, and for the first 20 minutes of every meeting, basically everybody sits there and they read this 6-page report, and then you kind of discuss it. So what is the PR FAQ, and did I get that right?
Sure. PR FAQ is a tool that is used in a very specific named process at Amazon called working backwards. It was so pivotal to Amazon. It's the title of our book, but working backwards is the process that Amazon uses to take an idea and to vet it and to see whether it's worth greenlighting and worth building. And if you had to remember one thing about the working backwards process, it's really starting from the customer experience and then working backwards from that. And the way that Amazon does that is they use a type of 6-page memo, a written narrative called the PR FAQ document, short for press release and frequently asked questions. So the first thing you do if you have an idea, or if you're a team that has an idea, what you do is you write a 1-page press release, and it has to have a couple of things. It has to clearly define the customer problem that you're trying to solve, and then it has to clearly explain what your solution is so it's this dialogue going on with the customer, what the solution is to that problem. And then the third thing is you have to convince the customer why they should adopt and use this solution, why it will make their life better. So sounds easy. It's really hard, especially when you're inventing something brand new. And it also sounds obvious, but a lot of companies use a different method in order to figure out what to build. A lot of companies use what's called a skills forward approach. They ask questions like, what are we good at? What are our core competencies? What are our competitors doing? How can we nudge into an adjacent market? So a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats is a typical type of tool. That's a skills forward approach. We did that too up until about 2003, 2004. And we realized that we were not, we're forgetting the customer too often. Yeah. So the customer's not with us on that journey. And so Jeff said, we want to make sure the customer from the very beginning of an idea is with us on that journey to see if we should turn that idea into a product or feature that we're building.
Okay. So the way that you develop, and I'm just thinking for people who are listening or watching this, if they want to develop their PR FAQ, or if they want to do this as an exercise with their team, where do you start? It sounds like there are a specific set of questions that you're supposed to answer, and you create this document, and that's basically what you present that everybody reads together during the first 20 minutes of a meeting.
Yeah. So the first thing you do is you write that 1-page press release, and if the problem's not well understood or defined, and if you don't have a solution that solves that problem, and after you read the press release, you're not excited to go out and go use that product or feature, you just stop and you go write another version of that press release. So it's an iterative process. Okay. So even before you get to a room in front of a bunch of people, you can do this with a smaller group informally to get that document ready. And then the FAQ document are all of the hard questions and answers that you'll have to ask and answer to customers or to people who will give you money to fund the project. So the external FAQ is one type, like how much is it going to cost? Why should I use this product? The internal FAQs are, how are we going to bring this to market? What are the hard technology or privacy or problems we need to solve? You need to ask and answer that. Once you have that document together, then you go to, and it's usually some senior managers, whoever's going to greenlight that product or idea, and you hand it out virtually or physically hand out the paper, and then there's 20 minutes of silence. And really, what's happening in that point in time is you just see a massive amount of information going from the presenting team, which are the authors that wrote the document, over to a set of experienced people who are trying to help make sure that this is an idea that's worth building. And if it's not, they can ask questions. And it's an iterative process before it gets greenlit. Most ideas actually don't make it through this process. But at the end of the day, then there's a decision that is made, okay, is this worth building or not? And what it does is it gains alignment with everyone in the room about what are we building for customers? Is it good and virtuous on its own, and is it worth doing?
And how do you decide? Well, I guess before how do you decide? Can anybody do this, and can you do as many of these as you want? And how long does it typically take? Because I would imagine you could spend maybe, I don't know, could you do one of these in a week or in a few days and just keep cranking them out until one of your ideas gets approved?
Yeah, I mean, depending on the complexity of the idea, it takes several days to write this document, so you cannot do it overnight. You can throw a bunch of slides together overnight and throw together a presentation. These narratives take longer than that. You have to get clarity of thought before it's ready to present to the group.
Okay.
And most ideas that get greenlit probably have gone through that, half a dozen or, some cases a dozen times where there's still, we haven't quite nailed it yet. We haven't quite defined the problem, or the solution doesn't solve it, or it's really the market's not big enough. That's another reason why a lot of ideas don't make it through. The total addressable market is just not big enough to move the needle. So there are lots of great ideas, but it has to be a great idea and a great solution that's worth building.
Okay.
So every idea has to go through this process, and it forces alignment with the team to be very clear on what you're building. It may seem like you're moving slow at this stage because, some people want to just write software or build prototypes and throw it out there. But this is it's the difference between what we talk about is the difference between velocity and speed. You can be going 100 miles an hour in any direction. That's the speed is 100 miles an hour. The velocity has a directional component about, okay, what are we actually building? And it gains alignment. And we think that we've seen that slowing down at this stage actually gets you to your end goal faster. Because you know which direction you're moving in, and you're not zigging and zagging around along that journey.
Okay, so let's say we're at the meeting now. I don't know. There's maybe 10 of us or so. Everybody reads this thing for 20 minutes, and then what's next? So everybody's done reading it. It's my document. I put it together. Does everybody go around the room and now critique, ask questions, or what's the next step?
Yeah, so usually, especially in today's day and age, people aren't actually in the same room. Yeah. So it's a collaborative document, and people are adding questions, comments, and notes on there. And so it's usually more than one person that's presenting it, because it takes more than one person to write this. So there's the presenting team, let's just put it that way. So you say, okay, after those 20 minutes, you can do one of two things. You can go through just in sequential order and address the questions. Some of them are answered during that 20 minutes. If there's a simple question, you can answer it right as that question is asked, is the writing team. Or you can say, if there are a lot of questions, you can say, well, let's focus on the biggest ones first.
Okay.
And, and then, we want to get those done. And so sometimes it's the senior leader could say, before we get to all these other questions, here's the high order bit or the issue we need to solve or gain clarity on, because it doesn't make sense to go talk about these other things until we get this point right. So there's not one single way to do it. Those are two ways that different teams have done it, and you can do it either way works.
Okay.
But if there aren't that many comments, you can just go sequentially through it. But if there are a lot, you need to focus on the biggest ones first.
Okay. Are you able to share any ideas that got approved, or any ideas perhaps even more fun that failed, that didn't end up going through that?
Well, every idea or feature that you've seen that Amazon has launched since about 2004 has gone through this process. Every AWS feature that came out went through, so S3, EC2, those are the two of the first and two of the largest Amazon Web Service products have gone through that. Those in particular went through well over a dozen each revisions of that, because we didn't actually know what was the core problem we were going to solve. EC2 in particular, which is Amazon's compute storage service where you can rent compute power. At first, the idea was, well, let's make it easy to provision machines in a data center. Because before, when you wanted to launch something, believe it or not, you had to scope out hardware. You had to, plan how many machines do I need, and there was a lot of physical heavy lifting required, and it migrated through the PRFAQ process to say, well, what we're really selling are CPU cycles, and the compute is the core dimension along which we're going to scale. So that was the journey during that PRFAQ process. Firephone went through that process, and that was a failure. The product's no longer being sold. So, that product was a failure. There's certain elements that we took from Firephone that were incorporated into things like Echo and Alexa, the voice recognition. But that's an example. So it's that something that failed. And I would say by design, if you don't have some of these failures, you're probably not moving fast enough, because you want to move fast without all of the information that you'd like to have, and you want to invent an experiment, and it's really not an experiment if you know it's going to work beforehand. So some of these things are going to fail.
So I guess it's important for people to know that it's not like a perfect process, meaning it's not like as if you do this, there's guaranteed success. You still go through failures. So in the example of the phone that you mentioned, I mean, obviously, how much that was a massive project, right? I think over $1 billion. So why did that particular project fail, whereas something like Amazon Web Services or like the Kindle succeed? Was there just a different process applied, or was it something that you guys missed along the way?
Well, first of all, you have to take a step back. There are two types of failures. One is you can have a well thought out, well executed idea and project, and it didn't resonate with customers after it went to market. Yeah. Sometimes you just have to try, release a product to see if customers are going to, buy it, use it, whatever it happens to be. Those types of failures you want to have, and they will occur through that process. The other type of failure is execution misses, where it was you built, there were a lot of defects in the product, or it was sloppy execution. Those are errors you want to get rid of and figure out, well, why did it happen, and how can we not make that mistake? Yeah. The Fire Phone really was did not know with some of the features we were pioneering, or Amazon was pioneering at the time, whether they would resonate with customers, and you had to put the whole package together in order to see if that would work. There's not just one feature that makes something like that work. It's the whole ecosystem. And so Amazon spent a lot of time and resources creating and launching this. But after that wasn't successful, Jeff Bezos was really the one front and center saying, I hope we have even bigger failures. So although it was a large failure in absolute dollars, when you compare it to Amazon's appetite for an ability to invest, it was something Amazon could afford to do. Yeah. So they weren't betting the company on it. And Jeff said, as the company grows, the magnitude of our mistakes have to grow also, because we're not pushing that. We won't be moving fast enough. Okay. And the last thing is, the reason why it's okay to have some of these failures is that it's some of these successes are asymmetric. So an AWS or a Kindle can pay for a lot of experiment and failures along the way, just because how big these businesses are. So if you're going to invent, you have to be prepared and sometimes to fail.
Does Amazon have a process around failure? So in other words, when something fails or doesn't succeed, what do you do?
Yes, so there are retrospectives, and you classify, what were the errors, or what would we have done differently. But if there's something like an outage, or a service is down, there's a very specific one called the correction of errors report, and that's really just a very clinical look at what happened, what were the conditions that led to this to happen, what mistakes did we make along the way, but then just as important, what are the things we are going to change from what we're doing today in order to make sure that this doesn't ever happen again. And again, it's not meant to assign blame or point fingers. It's meant to uncover what conditions allowed for this defect to happen, and what processes or changes do we need to make so it doesn't happen. So you get a little bit better every day.
Walk me through the retrospectives a little bit, because I find those to be fascinating, and I'm sure a lot of people would love to learn what Amazon does. Are there a specific set of questions that you seek to answer after a failure occurs or a mistake occurs? And if so, what are those? Do you do them in a group setting? What's the process?
Yeah. So for the correction of errors, those typically go out. You want those to go out to a very broad audience, because you even if they're in a different group, you want other people to know about it so they don't make the same type of mistake.
Yeah.
So, those correction of error reports, people can look those up. The project retrospectives, there's not one single way that those groups do that. So it's, each group or team has different types of retrospectives, and, to share lessons learned on what went well, which is often just as important as what didn't go so well.
This episode is brought to you by Namely. We've all heard the news. The Great Resignation is affecting so many businesses, and keeping employees engaged and connected is crucial to avoid high turnover. That's why you should check out Namely.com, the all-in-one HR solution. Whether you have 50 employees or 1,000 employees, Namely will help you maintain a great experience for the entire employee lifecycle, with onboarding, performance, payroll, benefits administration, and compliance, all on one intuitive platform. If you want to become everyone's favorite HR leader, then check out Namely.com today, and for a limited time, you will get your first month free when you make the switch. Go to Namely.com, that's Namely.com. Okay. The other thing that I wanted to touch on, which I realized we didn't talk about yet, which we probably should have, is obviously the title of the book is Working Backwards. And I was reading that you guys imagine, for example, the customer reviews that you might get, like you really do work backwards. So can you talk about what that is and what that means? So for example, let's say I had an idea and I was an employee at Amazon for a product or service, we wanted to work backwards from there. What are the things that I should be imagining or thinking about before taking any next steps?
Yeah, and so the things that you should be really imagining, and you can think of it as having a dialogue with a customer. And again, it gets back to what is the specific problem you're trying to solve, and then what is the solution that you're proposing, and is it should customers use it, and is it big enough to be worth it? Those are the things that you need to be crystal clear on in the very beginning. And it can be hard, especially if you have a competitor who's released something that's gaining traction in the market, and you realize, okay, well, we don't have anything yet. Should we just copy something and launch something? But at Amazon, we resist that temptation, because usually if you're just going to copy that product, by the time you get that product out, they're already on version 2 or 3, and you're still behind, and you've wasted all of that time, which could have been better, served either creating a different type of solution or getting to where you want to go faster. Yep. And we talk about back in 2004 when we knew Apple was going to release iTunes for Windows. Huge deal. At that time, Apple had never created a Windows application, and that what they were doing is they were saying, we're going all in on digital music. And yeah, it would have been nice if we had a great digital music product and a hardware device like the iPod, and could release that the next day or the day before it came out, but we didn't. But we resisted the temptation as doing a fire drill project to say, let's go build this, copycat project. We even decided at that point, digital music probably isn't the first place we want to focus to the move to digital. It's actually going to be digital books. And then we had to focus on, what does that mean? And, that's how we invented with Kindle. So ideas are, a lot of organizations typically have a lot more ideas than they can actually do. And so this process is really about what are the ones that are worth doing, the big ones that are worth doing, and solve real customer problems. And I think that's another overlooked value of the working backwards process, is it really focuses you on what really matters to customers.
And is it true that part of the process is you actually imagine what customers would say about it? Like you write out like what some customer reviews could be of the product?
Yeah, it's their quotes in the press release.
Quotes, yeah.
Most press releases typically have a quote from a customer. If it's a business product, it would be the CEO or the purchasing manager at whatever business. If it's a payments product, or if it's a consumer product, it would be an actual customer quote that you would want the customer to say. And then there's another quote you typically have from who's ever releasing that product within Amazon.
Okay.
And those quotes, they're really just tools to help gain clarity and alignment on what you're building. It's not the actual press release. Usually that's going to be released, 6 months, a year later when the product is out there. But it's really meant to get the team all aligned to say, I get it. Here's the problem we're trying to solve. Here's what we're not trying to solve. And so let's go build something that, is embodied in this document.
Okay. Another practice that Amazon is famous for, which I understand has since been replaced with something else, is the two pizza rule. And I feel like everybody's talked about it. A lot of people know that Amazon is famous for, the team size should be no bigger than 2 large pizzas can feed. But recently, or I guess over the past few years, that's actually been replaced by something else, right? You moved away from that.
I would say we evolved. So we went from a cool pizza food themed one to a geeky single threaded leader, single threaded term. But what we were trying to do in the beginning, these processes, let me just mention all these processes that we talk about were Amazon trying to solve problems in order to continue to grow. And they're processes that most companies face. And so two pizza teams were an initial attempt to solve the problem where we're hiring all these people, but we're slowing down. We're getting burdened by communicating between teams, and these dependencies are crushing us, and we're not able to build products as fast as we want. And so, excuse me. And so what the first attempt at solving this problem was to separate into small teams and to make them as autonomous as possible, both from a technology stack in terms, because before we had one giant code base, so it took a while to have the right technology platform that would allow these teams to build on their own without having to talk to a whole bunch of other teams in order to get their work done. And then the second part of dependencies were decision making, where you'd have to go up, talk to your manager and 3 other groups in order to get something done. And so we created these things called 2 pizza teams, where 2 pizzas could feed the whole team. So call it 5 to 10 or 5 to 12 people. And we tried to isolate them as much as possible. We realized, though, that wasn't the team size wasn't really the most important critical success factor. What the critical success factor is what we call the single-threaded leader or a single-threaded team, which means, is this person or is a team, do they wake up and are they focused and only focused on solving one particular problem or building one particular product? Mm-hmm. That was more important than the team size. And so for things... for some things you needed a bigger team than 12 people anyway. And so it evolved. There's some learnings that we got from the 2 pizza teams, but it ended up at single threaded teams and single threaded leaders is how you can move fast and have an organization that can build things without getting crushed by dependencies.
So a single-threaded leader and a single-threaded team. So the team is only focused on one thing. And is it a product, or how specific is it? Is it a feature? Is it a problem?
Depending on the team size, so it has this nice fractal quality. Let's just take digital, for instance. So Steve Kessel, was the senior vice president in charge of digital. He had hired Bill Carr, who's my co-author and colleague, to run digital music and digital video. Bill in turn hired single-threaded leaders solely focused on digital video and digital music.
Okay.
So you can. It's really the question is, who is the most senior person at the company who is focused on solving this problem and nothing but this problem.
Okay.
If the problem is something as big as digital video, you need a leader who can actually build an organization and build a product or set of products to go solve that. If it's a product that's smaller, it could be a senior product manager who's single-threaded, or a software engineer who's focused on this. So it really depends on the problem size and opportunity at hand.
Yeah, I actually find that quite unique, because I find a lot of leaders in organizations are responsible for many things. They're looking after multiple products. They're looking after divisions. They're looking after so many different types of things that it becomes pretty hard to actually get any of them done. So in Amazon's case, let's say you're focusing on a single thing, and other things come your way. Do you just say no, or does everybody know you're a single-threaded leader? Like, how does that get communicated to everybody?
Yeah, so internally, what am I supposed to solve? Is this in my charter or purview, or is it not? And so you have the autonomy and freedom to say, well, no, this is not something our group can do. I can commit the resources to go do that. It may be a good idea. It may be worth doing, and you may have to go. That person who has that idea can always go and lobby for resources through the working backwards PRFAQ process to figure out, hey, this is something that's worth building, spinning up a team, or getting a team to do that. So that is how it's really up to the leader and the team to know, here's the specific thing we're solving, and we do not want to be burdened by other dependencies, placed on us by external organizations, if we can at all avoid it.
Okay. So before we jump on to something else, are there any other practices that you think people need to know about when it comes to Amazon? Besides, I think that we talked about 3, right? The PRFAQs, 2 pizzas, single-threaded leaders. We talked about the retrospectives for failures. Any others come to mind that you want to share?
Yeah, I would just very quickly mention, especially for smaller organizations that are starting out and growing fast, to have leadership principles that really define who you are and how you make decisions. Because a small organization that has a strong founder or leader, they are the leadership principles, and if they're in the room, they can talk and make a lot of the decisions. But once you get to a certain size, you have to codify that. And then the second part that you have to do, that's really important for a small organization to grow and stay true to its roots and remain nimble, is to have a hiring process that is a deliberate hiring process, where the people who you're bringing on board embody those leadership principles. Because if you don't have the leadership principles and you don't have a hiring process that maps a candidate onto their behavior onto those leadership principles, what happens is they'll bring whatever their own leadership vision or principles are from their prior organizations, and you get your company changes fundamentally. So if you grow from 10 to 50 people, and 40 people have brought in, and you weren't deliberate about what type of people you're bringing in terms of leadership principles, you have a different company when you're 50 people. And that's why people say it's not like it used to be. It's because you didn't have that deliberate process. So that is, I think, that one thing and that was one of the first processes that Amazon put in place. It was in 1999, called the bar raiser process, which is really it has some other components, but it's all about mapping a candidate's past behavior onto Amazon's leadership principles.
Can you walk me through how that works? So let's say I'm interviewing for Amazon. How do you begin to map that stuff together to determine if I'm a good candidate?
So there's the interviewing panel of 5 to 7 people, let's say, and each of those interviewers have a set of 2 or 3 leadership principles that they're responsible for interviewing the candidate to see what was their, do they embody these leadership principles, and to gather data to answer that question. And I'm setting aside some of the functional interviewing. So for software engineers, you need to make sure can they write and deliver, scalable, reliable code? That definitely still needs to happen. But the rest of the panel has to collect information to see how that person maps to the leadership principles, and then then they need to write their feedback, and then they're going to have to justify it in front of their peers. So you can't talk to any of the other interviewers to say, hey, this is great, this person's great, go do a sell. You have to come up with your own independent opinion and write your feedback. It's really as close to a verbatim transcript, and then your assessment over whether you would hire this person and why. And you submit that feedback, and then there's a debrief meeting that happens. So everyone who's interviewed the candidate gets together, and the first thing you do is you read the document. So you read all of that feedback compiled together, and the person who facilitates the meeting is not the hiring manager. It's a specific role called the bar raiser, and the bar raiser is not in the chain of command who's the hiring manager. It's someone whose job is really to ensure that are they going to raise the bar if they get hired at Amazon? So they don't have urgency bias on, okay, we got to hire 3 people or we're not going to get our stuff done for the quarter. And so the bar raiser facilitates the meeting. And an important part of right when you're reading that feedback is you have to realize that me as an interviewer, I only have one piece of the puzzle. And so once I've read all the feedback, that's when you put the pieces together. The first thing that the bar raiser asks is, okay, does anyone want to change their vote? Because now you have complete information, and then you have detailed discussion about, does this person, now that we have all of the data, that we've gathered all the data, let's discuss how and how much they map to the Amazon leadership principles. And it's meant to help the hiring manager make the right hiring decision.
Okay. So let's take, for example, what would be one of the leadership principles at Amazon?
So, think big is a leadership principle, and so you would ask questions about, let's say I'm think big and bias for action is another one. Okay. So I would have a set of questions going into the interview where I would want to ask questions about how the candidate specifically demonstrated where they were thinking big. So how did you take an idea and make it make it bigger, or something that's worthwhile, worth doing? But you take a small idea and turn it into something that really materially made a difference to customers or the company bottom line. And you go through, and they'll tell you some examples about that. Okay. Bias for action. When did you have to convince a group of people to move faster? And how did you do that without taking shortcuts that would compromise on quality or the customer experience? Okay. And you get very specific data on what they did. It's not questions like, it's what's called behavioral interviewing. It's not questions like, tell me about your resume, or what do you think hypothetically about this? Because a candidate can give any answer they want, and it really doesn't tell you anything about the candidate. So at Amazon, it's really behavioral interviewing. What has the candidate done in the past, and how have they embodied and exhibited the Amazon leadership principles?
I remember companies like Google used to be famous for asking these really weird questions. And I, back in the day, like 20 years ago, when I was interviewing for a full-time job, somebody asked me, how many skis are sold in the United States every year? That was part of my interview question. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? And, they wanted to see the thinking process of how you could come up with that too. Is that still a thing? I mean, do you guys ask anything weird like that?
At Amazon, we don't. I mean, different companies have different ways to hire people, and Google's obviously a very successful company, so I'm not going to comment on their hiring process in particular. But we just found that those questions, like how many windows are in Seattle, or how many marbles can you fit in the stadium, the Seattle Stadium, didn't really weren't good predictors of this person going to be successful at Amazon? Because you could have someone who could answer that question very well, and if they didn't really embody those leadership principles, whether they knew the answer to that or not, they probably were
Doesn't matter.
not going to work out well at Amazon. So we tried to figure out what types of questions and data can we gather that really assess, is this candidate going to be successful in given all of the constructs and confines we have at Amazon.
Yeah, which that makes
a generic brain teaser didn't do that for us.
Yeah, no, that makes far more sense. Okay, so there's a panel of 4 or 5 people. Everyone interviews me individually, so it's not a team, right? Everyone interviews me individually. They ask me these questions, they do their write-up, and in that same report, they say something like, I would hire this person, like this person has my vote or not. And then everyone gets together, there's a debrief, and then everyone says, can you change your vote or not? Everyone looks at the feedback, and let's say that process is done. Is it now kind of like yes or no? Basically, I'm trying to get a sense of how long does it take to hire a person? Because you have 1.3 million employees, one of the world's largest employers. Some companies take months to hire a single person. How long does this process take for you guys?
Yeah, the bar raiser process I'm talking about is really for the salaried positions.
Okay.
And the higher volume people working in frontline fulfillment center positions, those go through a different process, and it's quicker because that's where the bulk of the employees are. So there's not enough time to do that. But for those salaried positions, there's typically 1 or 2 phone screens before the candidate does this in-person thing. So there's an initial assessment, and then there's a round of interviews. And pre-pandemic, you would come out and interview at the location.
Yep.
And so how long that takes, elapsed time is really depending on schedules, but you would probably, the candidate would probably talk with a total of about 7 or 8 different people from this process. And it's not months. The other thing is that, especially there's a lot of competition for these high performers, and so you don't want it to take months. You want to be able to make an accurate assessment as quickly as possible, because those candidates probably won't be on the market 2 months later.
Yeah. You actually bring up an interesting point, and that is, how do you treat high performers? Do they get treated differently than other employees inside the organization?
On a day-to-day basis, treated differently. No, because you're not really you're not evaluating them on a day-to-day basis. But in terms of compensation and opportunities, you have your best performers working on your biggest opportunities.
Yep.
So they'll naturally migrate there. And then in terms of the compensation looking forward, the top performers do eventually get more compensation and promoted faster than people who aren't top performers.
Well, we only have a couple minutes left. Are there any other practices, and this is kind of the fun part, things that you wanted to put in the book but didn't, as far as a workplace practice, a policy, or even a story, maybe about working with Jeff, or something that happened that didn't make it to the book that you think is worth sharing?
Well, what we just there's a very small thing we alluded to in the book, which is more focused around operating cadence and also the second one would be, how do you spend your time as a leader in a group? But the operating cadence, we've gotten a whole lot of questions about, but what do I do on a daily, a weekly, a monthly basis? How do I plan what I'm going to do for this quarter and this year? So, Amazon does have some very specific policies, for processes for annual planning, QBRs, quarterly business reviews, and MBRs, or monthly business reviews. And I was surprised at the amount of questions after the book came out about that. So I kind of wish that we had explained some of that more. And then the other thing and this is what Jeff told me, and I just briefly mentioned it earlier, is that your top leaders, you want them working on your company's biggest opportunities. Then those do not necessarily mean your biggest current businesses. And so one of the things that's unusual about Amazon is you can have a very, very senior leader move from managing a large business to starting a new group that has a decent chance of failing, just because there's so much to invent and that that's new, not because you want them to succeed, but so a couple examples are Steve Kessel went from running Amazon's largest business, which was the physical shipment of media at the time, to go start digital, whatever, and that was literally the charter. Andy Jassy, after he was he was actually Jeff's first technical advisor, could have had any job he wanted in the company after that, and he chose to go. Maybe there's something to this web services thing, and it was a relatively small group and not a lot of funding, and it was small for a while, and it grew into AWS, and now Andy's the CEO of Amazon. So and I could go over more and more examples of, but the reason why those people did that is because Jeff and those people realized, if this works, this has the opportunity to be very, very big, and unless you put someone on that who knows what big looks like and how to build something that is that big, it's not going to get that big. So if you set your expectations low with how you staff, that's kind of what you're going to get. So that's another story and nugget that comes out in the book. But
does Amazon do some stuff traditionally as well? For example, annual performance reviews, annual engagement surveys. Do you guys have stuff like that there?
Yeah, and that's, Amazon's experimented and changed over time with that, so it's not like bar raisers, which started in 99, is largely unchanged to where it is today. So for performance, appraisals and manager feedback and peer feedback, Amazon has, does that obviously, and they, and tried and changed things as that process is continuing to evolve.
Yeah, it's crazy that there's I always find that some organizations do things some differently in some areas, and in other areas they find that some of the, I don't want to call them older practices, are still effective and still work. So it's interesting that you guys still have some of the, I suppose, more traditional things, but then have completely transformed some other processes as well. And it's a good lesson, I think, because sometimes organizations and leaders are very quick to like, oh, we gotta change this, we gotta revamp this, we gotta transform this completely. And some people are like, whoa, that stuff actually might work. Let's chill on that for a little bit and see what we need to fix.
Yeah, you have a fixed amount of innovation dollars, if you want to look at it that way, and you need to know where to invent and where to place those resources on inventing, and where what you have is good enough, or what's tried and true methods in the industry are good enough and will work. So that's a good thing to keep in the back of your mind.
Well, Colin, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I hope people watching and listening have enjoyed it as well. Why don't you let people know, where can they go to learn more about you, your book, anything that you want to mention for people to check out? Please feel free to do so.
Sure. We have got a website, workingbackwards.com. It has some extra resources outside of the book if you want to get into some more detail on the nuts and bolts. And then, it can obviously point you on where to buy the book, but it talks about how we advise different companies. But workingbackwards.com, all one word, is probably the best place to go if you're interested in finding out more.
Well, Colin, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to speak with me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a bunch, Jacob. I enjoyed the conversation.
And thanks everyone for tuning in. My guest again, Colin Breyer. Make sure to check out his book, Working Backwards. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of value from it, and I'll see all of you next time. Thanks again for tuning into the show, and don't forget to go to 6leadershiptrends.com to grab a copy of my brand new PDF, which is going to walk you through the 6 trends that are shaping leadership and what it means to be a leader. And it will also give you action items for what you should be doing for each one of these 6 trends to adapt and evolve so that you can be a better leader in the future of work. Again, that is 6leadershiptrends.com. You can either spell out the number 6 in the URL or just use the number 6 in the URL. They will both take you to the same place. Thanks again for tuning in.